This is a Sports Catastrophe production. Hey there, other ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Dabbit welcoming you to another Sports Catastrophe birthday boy. And the birthday boy for today, April the 18th, is a point guard who was one of the best shooters around and a good passer. He's been in the Hall of Fame since 1991, and he was a key member of the Royals/Kings franchise in basketball. He also played for Boston, but his name is Tiny Archibald. So Tiny Archibald is now 74 years old. Tiny Archibald grew up in a rough and tumble neighborhood in the South Bronx, and then would enroll at University of Texas El Paso. Too late to be part of the famous 1966 Glory Road team that shocked a lot of people by winning the NCAA title, but he would play under the great Don Hoskins from 67 to 70. In the 1970 NBA draft, he was going to get picked, and he got picked in the second round, the second pick of the second round. The first pick of the second round went to San Diego when they had the Rockets before Houston did, and they took Kelvin Murphy from Niagara, one of the greatest players from Niagara University ever. The 1970 NBA draft would be memorable for Bob Lanier going first overall, Rudy Tomjanovich going second, Pete Maravich going third, Dave Cowens going fourth, and yeah, a good top four. Next up was the Cincinnati Royals. Cincinnati had an NBA team at one time. They made a trade with San Francisco, who had the Warriors at the time, and they took Tiny Archibald. The ABA also drafted him, but he preferred to play in the NBA. So he played for Cincinnati and did okay in his first game, losing to the Knicks, but that's okay. Tiny would do very well for himself. And after 1972, the Cincinnati Royals were no more. Cincinnati couldn't afford the team, so they moved it to Kansas City for a good few years. It used to be called the Kansas City Omaha Kings. The Kings would play both at Kansas City and Omaha. It's kind of weird having a team play in two different states, Kansas City, Missouri, and Omaha, Nebraska. That's kind of weird. And then Kansas City decided to say, you know what, screw it. We want our franchise. Anyway, Tiny Archibald in 1973 led the NBA in scoring and assists, which was amazing. The only player ever to do that, to lead the league in scoring and assists. That's kind of awkward. So this was huge. He was named the Sporting News NBA MVP, but not the real MVP, which kind of sucks. I wish he did it. So anyway, Tiny Archibald couldn't make the playoffs for the life of him. Kansas City just wasn't that good. But then Kansas City in 1975 made the playoffs, but lost to the Bulls in the first round in 6. Archibald was a fan favorite for the Royals/Kings. Of course, the Kansas City Kings would move in 1985 to Sacramento, famously being kicked out by their major indoor soccer team. The New York Nets would benefit, even though he was the Kings' most popular player. He was traded to the New York Nets for 2 first-round picks, which ended up being Otis Birdsong and Phil Ford. Decent picks. In 1976. In 34 games, he would play for the New York Nets before they moved to New Jersey and had 20.5 points per game. But unfortunately, his injuries would be too much, and the Nets decided to trade him to Buffalo before the 1978 season for 2 first-round picks, which the Nets got Michael Ray Richardson, who was a great defender when he wasn't on cocaine, and of course Clifford Robinson. Unfortunately, Tiny would tear his Achilles tendon and never played for the Braves, which was shocking, because Buffalo would have had a great player, Tiny Archibald, just before they moved to San Diego to become the Clippers. Buffalo then traded him to Boston as part of a 7-player deal before the 78 season. Unfortunately, Tiny Archibald was overweight. However, he fixed himself up and would help the Celtics do well in the NBA for 3 straight seasons. Tiny Archibald would finally get his ring in 1981, helping the Celtics win the title over the Houston Rockets alongside Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. Archibald actually put up 13 points and 12 assists in the closeout game of the 1981 NBA Finals. So that's good. Tiny was a Boston icon. And then he got waived by the Celtics in 1983, played for the Bucks, and was point guard for all their games that he played in. Unfortunately, Boston would win the 1984 championship, so that kind of sucks. But Archibald's legacy is huge. All NBA first team 3 times, All NBA second team 2 times, 7-time All Star. He won the 81 All Star Game MVP. He was one of the 50 and 75 greatest players in NBA history. Sorry about that. Someone's trying to get me. Tiny Archibald would be a assistant coach for Georgia and UTEP, where he would help Tim Hardaway with his stuff and all that. So his regular season, he had 876 games, 18.8 points per game, 7.4 assists, and 2.3 rebounds. So he did okay for the Kings franchise. Then New York for a year, well, the New York Nets, then Boston and Milwaukee. Only going to the playoffs 5 times, 4 as a Celtic. But he got his ring in 1991. So anyway, it was pretty good and all that. So Tiny Archibald is a great player. Kind of underrated, if you ask me. He was a good point guard that really played on some bad teams before he went to Boston, but it's the whole bias factor. And that's why Tiny Archibald isn't as good as people think he is. Anyway, I'm Jeff Diamond, I do.